Good evening. I know you all want to take a breath. Excuse me. But we do have some really interesting people to engage in a conversation with us all about how to end violence against women. And so because we really only have about 35 minutes to solve all the problems in the world, I'd like to start right away. I had a little speech for you about how this issue has had such an impact on us and on this country, and especially as Americans seem to have elected, and I have to use this word, alleged abuser, that it does make you feel like there is really not enough being done and very little hope. But the whole point of this process is to find a way to get to the root and to do something about it. And I'm really grateful to Deepa Mehta for making this film so that we could have this conversation. Feel free. And so at this time, I'd like to call up to the stage our guests this evening, Suvercha Pasricha, Peter Sloly, Sandy Simpson, Wendy Cukier, and Ratna Omidvar, and as well as the filmmaker Deepa Mehta. Welcome. And here they come. Please pick up. Yes. And, I should also say that I'm really hoping, even though there's so many of us here and we have so little time, that you too can ask some questions and engage, because I'm sure that you all, there are many of you here who have expertise, many of you who have experience and want to have something to say. Deepa, I am going to start with you because there is possibly a question that people are asking, is whether these stories, as you've told them here, are actually from research done on the actual perpetrators, or whether they were riffed off of some information that your team was able to garner about the perpetrators. So I think that's a question we would like to start with. I'd like to start with, because I'm curious too.
We don't have much information about the rapists. We have just a sort of an idea as to what each of them, or where they came from, where their families are from, the juvenile who ran away, and who was a bus driver, and what kind of, but it was very general. So we used those stories as frameworks. And then the rest, the actors actually, because it was a workshop, we collaborated and the actors invented the stories of the rapists, the individuals did.
And to what extent did you think they were authentic in their base? I mean, how?
Well, I've grown up in India. I mean, you also, it's not even just India. I mean, this story is very particular to India, but it's universal. It happens everywhere in the world. I mean, I think all of you are aware what happened in Brazil, what happens in our own backyard in the West Coast. So I felt, it was a feeling, Susan. They felt authentic. I know many people like the rapists. I know many people, men like the 6 that have been, that were, so it was a feeling that it was authentic. It felt right.
I think what I'm going to do, because the backgrounds of our guests are so varied, that I'd like to ask you individually. I'll go through and ask you, based on your own experience and the work that you've done in various areas related to this, what you think is one of, because we're going to be talking about a million things. There's not one thing, and all of us know there's not one thing. But if there were to be one thing that you would want to change to make this, to stop breeding perpetrators in the way that we do, how would you begin, Ratna? You can mention more than one, but
that's $1 million question. I don't think there's a simple answer, but since you're asking me the question, I think the one thing that has to change is culture. It is culture that breeds a certain set of values. And whether it's in India or in Brazil or in the West Coast, as Deepa said, a culture that allows and tolerates and sometimes promotes violence against women in a very systemic way. And as you said, we now have social license from the president-elect in the United States that it's all right to grab and grope women as an expression of power. I think all these messages get imbued into our culture in a very particular way. Now, I have to say, the film is set in India, and so there's something particular about Indian culture that may require some further discussion. You know, I'm from India, like Deepa. We grew up in the same town. When she says she knows these people, I know prototypes of these people exactly like that. And the issue with Indian culture is, and I'm an Indian, and I love my culture, and I love various aspects of my country, not all of them. I think there is the exercise of power through violence against women, whether it's physical or verbal, is very prevalent in our society. And it's not a matter of class. This is where I'd like to deconstruct it a little. It happens in poor, in poverty-stricken homes, and it happens in very wealthy homes. The exercise of power over mothers, sisters, daughters, and sometimes the exercise of power, women over women in our society, is quite particular to our context. So I'll just stop there.
Wendy, I know that you've done a lot of work on the essential violence in our culture. You've done incredible work regarding gun control in this country post the Montreal massacre. Can you talk a little bit about what you think is one of the many root causes of violence against women that we have to deal with?
I mean, it's clearly complex. I certainly agree with Ratna. I think disparity, anger, gendered roles, and so on are important. But fundamentally, I think especially right now, I feel very strongly that everyone has to recognize their role. And the biggest problem we have, whether it's in Canada or whether it's internationally, is bystanders. And you know, until we all, every single one of us, and of course, my experience comes out of the, you know, working on gun control for many years, but whether it's gun control, whether it's equality in organizations, whether it's child poverty, all of these issues which seem large and intractable really can only be solved if everyone takes action, as opposed to thinking it's the responsibility of the police, it's the responsibility of the educators, it's the responsibility of the failures of the courts and our social services. So, and especially after the results of the US election, I really think we need a generation of activists to really step up and do everything that we can within our power, because as Ratna said, it's about power. We all have power.
And we should use it. Sandy, you have some knowledge in the work that you do at CAMH about the influence of trauma on potential perpetrators, and I know that was dealt with very strongly in the film. Can you shed some more light on how that dynamic actually, how you imagine and how you've seen that dynamic work?
I'll try. I'm struggling in many ways as a man watching this for the second time because of the universality of what it depicts in aspects of maleness and young blokiness that gets out of control. At times frustration in male development of how to relate to people and extend compassion appropriately to others, because they've learned that compassion's never extended appropriately to them. One of the problems we get tied up with, of course, is that there are probably many boys growing up with the same trauma who do not go on and manifest that piece. So we need to not be determinative about this, that the men acted with their own agency, but with their own history. And to insult others like them by saying that these men in some way were less responsible because of the context diminishes their responsibility as men, and to us, to other men, to understand how appropriate demonstrations and development of maleness can be appropriately manifest and how it can go awry. And there is a need for us all, and as fathers and brothers and friends and colleagues, and to be alert to and sensitized by the lessons that come from messages like this. So I think does trauma repeat? Do people who've been raped also rape? Yes. Do those things increase the risks? Yes. Is there a one-to-one causation? No. And in the work that I do, which is largely on the rehabilitation of people who've been violent, you have to understand those things, but you also must give that message of accountability to people for what they have done. For it is only in their acceptance of that their dignity can go forward and dignity can be afforded to other people, if that makes sense.
Deepa, you sent me a note from somebody who was concerned that the film might give the message that you were not making the perpetrators accountable. I know that's not your intention, but can you talk a little bit about why you think they might have had that impression, how you respond to that claim?
That was the impression I got from about 5 journalists who saw the film during TIFF. And there were 5 journalists who were male and who were from India. And I felt that that they were really, they were being extra careful. They wanted to be politically correct. I really felt that they were defending, I don't know how to put it, but I felt that they were saying that, there's too much sympathy in the film for the rapists. And I said, I was sort of taken aback, and I said, why do you think that? They said, well, you're not making them accountable. And I said, why are you saying that? What made you feel that? And they said, well, we absolutely against, or they should all be hung. They should be just killed. So it was that kind of being really on the other side of it. Just, we are males, we are Indian, and we absolutely disapprove of you even giving any space to the rapists. Mm-hmm. So that's what, it felt like psychology 101, but that's what I felt. And I was I tend to get angry really fast. So, it's useful. And, but then I started, I felt, so I just shrugged it off. Mm-hmm. And the only people who have said that to me have been guys. Mm-hmm.
But you almost, this may sound weird, but it's almost heartening to think that they're taking it so seriously. I mean, they've lost their compassion in the process, but it's almost, it's almost like the forelash or something, there's something in my brain about this. It's just that it's better that than saying, who cares if the women get raped? It's a better response.
I just felt that, whenever the film's been screened outside Canada and in Canada, and it was especially, I think in Spain, it was very interesting to see that it was the guys who were really taken in by the film. Mm-hmm. And not in this sort of overt, kill the rapist kind of way, but really felt that we were in it together. Mm-hmm. And that's what for us, when we did the film, it is not about they and us. It's about, if we have to stop this, we need you guys, don't disappear. And that was good.
Peter, we had a little conversation while we were in the green room about nature versus nurture and how that conversation goes. I know, Sandy, you and I at one point talked about whether, perpetrators are born that way. But what's your take on, in your experience, of how it is that we're breeding perpetrators in your view?
I'll take the easy one first. I mean, I have, thankfully, only rarely in my 27 years in policing come across, and I'm not a clinical psychologist, but what I would consider a true sociopath or psychopath. And was able to, in one instance, put one behind bars on a dangerous offender application and believe that they're still there. But as I was watching the film, a early part of my career when I was involved in the youth bureau, in those cases, many of them were sexual abuse cases, some of them very recent, some of them very historical, and it was those elements of the film that struck me first and have stayed with me most. It's the first time I've seen the film tonight, so I'm still processing a little bit. And in some cases, you could easily see the binary equation of victim and offender, and it was easier ones to investigate. In one case, I had a thought that, this is a very clear case of violent offender without any particular rationale against the victim. And as I got closer and closer to the offender, I started to see that they had been a victim themselves, and this was very much almost exactly a playing out of the trauma that they had experienced. And I was still a young man and still relatively immature in my profession and immature in my life cycle. And that was a really hard case for me to get my head fully around. And I can see the complexity of what was being brought out, whether it was fully scripted or whether actors were riffing on their own and coming up with what they thought was the right set of circumstances in psychology. But it is a very complex place. And I, again, agree with, obviously, the nature of the panel discussion so far. It's not the right thing to simply blame the offender and cause some discipline to happen against that, because that's too easy a solution, and it doesn't actually solve anything. If in the watching of the film or in the processing of the investigations or in the diagnosis of the psychosis, there isn't some element of that could be me, or that could have been the circumstances that I found myself in, if you can't make some part of that internal, not all of it, because it's too much to consume, then we probably won't individually or collectively or institutionally move to something more constructive.
Suvercha, in your work with women at CAMH, what have you discovered about how to stop the violence?
We end up treating the victims, the patients that are affected by violence. And I often think to myself that we talk about prevention of diabetes and high blood pressure, but we don't talk about violence of perpetration, prevention of violence and prevention of perpetration. For me, I think it stems from their childhood, their upbringing, the way we raise our children, the messages we give to them growing up. And so a lot of the emphasis, I think for me, like having grown up in India, children are seen, they are not heard. If you hear in the movie, the experiences that they've gone through as young boys of neglect, I mean, these children never learned to express their emotions. They didn't learn to deal with day-to-day problems. So I feel that these kind of basics have to be taught to the parents, to the society. The way we raise our children, that's how they're going to turn as adults. And I think a lot of emphasis has to go on these kind of messages to the society at a very home level, at a very individual level, because culture is not going to change overnight. I mean, we know that growing up in India, these kind of things are never taught about. I had a patient once who said, Dr. Pasricha, you need a license to drive, but you don't need a license to be a parent. How many parents or caregivers or immediate people around you end up victimizing their children, who in turn turn out to be perpetrators? So for me, I think we need a lot of emphasis on how our children are raised, how they are taught to deal with day-to-day life stresses. I mean, these young men in the movie, if you recall, they get rejected by those two more sophisticated, educated women, and that rejection leads to rage. They're drinking alcohol, they're in the mood, they're disinhibited, they end up doing what they did. Rape is wrong, but it's almost like after you see the movie, you feel sorry for those rapists.
No, I hope not. Oh,
No,
God.
but the experiences that they went through
No,
created the monsters that they turn out to be.
no, no.
Well,
Why aren't women rapists? Because they're the number one victims.
so the question,
Story form that doesn't help.
Okay, I'm sorry if it came out the wrong way, but I guess what I'm
I think
trying
it
to
did.
really,
I think it
did.
did.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if it came out the wrong way. Maybe it's the stage.
but I would ask the question. Well, two things can be true at the same time, as I know. So on the one hand, we can understand that everybody has a story to tell, that there's a reason why this happened. We should feel badly for a young kid who's raped when he's 6 years old. But at the same time, they should be held accountable for their actions. So both things can be true. But I think, hang on, please. Thank you. Also interesting. But I will get to the audience. I promise you get to speak but I.
Can I just
Please continue.
I think I want you to understand the trauma triangle, the victim, perpetrator, rescuer, bystander triangle that people who go through trauma fall into. A victim can turn into a perpetrator under times of stress and at different times of their lives. And another time they can be a bystander or a rescuer. I think Deepa's done a wonderful job of getting us off this triangle and talking about the issue. By saying that you feel sorry for the rapist, I do not mean at all that they're not accountable or what they did was not right. That's not the purpose. But I think that's what we want to get into, the root causes. This conversation is about what makes perpetrators form.
Yes, Wendy.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think you have to separate explanation from excuse. I think those are two different things, and I think that what the film did for me was really offer a very visceral explanation of how this happens. And I mean, we know if you beat a dog, you end up with a vicious animal. We don't think the same way about our children. And if you think about, and I mean, I'm sure everyone on the panel has seen this, but even in the city of Toronto, if you look at the conditions under which some of our children live, it's surprising to me that so many of them survive and don't become monsters. And so, you know, I don't disagree with this notion that education and so on are important, but there are so many structural issues around inequality and abuse that I think are invisible based on class to a certain extent in this city. The factors and the combination of those factors that we saw depicted in the film, I really don't see as being so alien or foreign to things that I've seen here. And the only other thing I wanted to say, which I think someone in the audience pointed out, is we can't ignore gender. Because girls grow up in these circumstances, girls are victims of violence, and girls are more likely to re-victimize themselves by attaching themselves to offenders and abusers than they are themselves to become abusers. And that is so much tied to gendered roles, culture, and socialization. That's something we have to attack.
Maybe just build off that, but beautifully expressed. And again, as I was cycling through the memory banks of so many cases of domestic abuse, where you'd seen a victimized woman re-victimizing within a relationship. I've seen that in my own family circumstances. I like the explanation versus excuse, and I wanted to bring the other E word, which is empathy. And I know for me, one of the things that made me a better police officer and ultimately a better person was that sense of empathy. At some point, you see very horrific circumstances, and you can keep it very binary. Okay, this person has done this horrible thing. I'm going to enforce the law, and I'm going to support a prosecution to the fullest and seek some sort of sentencing that somehow relates to the original offense. And not that I haven't done those things, but I did them better when I had some sense of empathy around the totality of the circumstances of all the folks involved in that triangle that was explained earlier. And I think that's a healthy place for someone who works in an institution and the institution itself to maintain that sense of empathy so that context and better solutions can be formed downstream.
I want to just add, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience because I can tell there's a lot of energy in the room, that gender roles, sex roles, disempowerment, this profound gender divide, and this is an issue to me, which is profoundly gendered, and I'm still freaking out every time I walk into a toy store and see the pink toys and the blue stuff, and it's all still going on as powerfully as it's ever gone before. And now I'm going to open the floor because I'm ready. Please speak up.
Oh, you don't want me to speak up? It will take lots of time.
I'm
Anyway.
sorry.
Hi.
But do.
The first thing is, I know there's one lady. Can you hear me?
I can, but I just wanted to say that it's important that you ask a question.
Oh yes, I know. I'm asking. Trust me, I am. Anyway, I liked in the film that what it said. The poverty. That's the way that I saw the picture. That the poverty cannot be excused to become the rapist. But there's a bigger picture and there's a bigger problem I saw in the film, and I would like to see how would you answer or to find a solution, because you said in the beginning that we want to solve the problem of the world within 35 minutes. But the problem I see here, yes, the power is exercised as to giving poor people to become the rapists or based on the way they've been isolated. But that power is given by powerful people that sit in the office in the capital city. And I wonder how, and just remember the Vikash, he said that the garbage has to be outside, but the knowledge inside. Those powerful people that gives the power to those people by taking everything away from them, that's who they become, because the society makes them to become who they are. So instead of, I think the core issue, and what do you think about it? If we are trying to fix the issue, don't you think that we have to start from the capital and then move down? Because everything starts with the head, and then it goes down. Sorry, it's a very complicated question. I wish I would ask it better, but thanks.
You know, if you're suggesting that we need more laws, we need the laws to be followed through with vigilance, we need law and order, and we need punishment and accountability. And if that starts from the top, you are right. It starts from the top. I read in The Guardian yesterday that the Minister of Women's Affairs in India is bemoaning the drop in tourism because of the focus on violence against women in India. So that's not the message that you want from the top. But, you know, absolutely, I think you're right. But politicians, and I now hang out a little too much with politicians, I would say that politicians are great on making big statements. You have to watch for the follow-through. You have to hold them accountable. You have to say what actually happened. I think that's easier, frankly, in a country like Canada, I think, than it is. I haven't lived in India for a long time. But I think in our country, at least, you have mechanisms and democratic processes and systems where you can ask those questions and shine the light on them. So I would encourage you to do that.
Any other questions? Hands up, please. Somebody gonna? Oh, there you are.
Yes.
Sorry.
Okay. So first off, I'd like to say thank you to each of you for the beautiful and very deep response that you gave. I just wanted to say thank you for that. And yeah, all of you had something very powerful to say, so thank you. I'd like to use my question to specifically ask Deepa Mehta. In the video at the beginning, there was a point where there was a book on the ground that was shown, and it said "Empower Women," and that was by Radha Swami. I know because I have that book, and I just wanted to know if that, on a personal level, if there was any sort of deeper meaning or significance of choosing that particular book. Was it just the title, or was there something else behind?
I haven't read the book, so I
Okay.
would say it was as shallow as the title. You know.
Okay.
So this sounds like a good, yes. And,
Okay, no problem.
know,
Because it
but
is a
now I will.
yeah. The Radha Swami as well as the book is both very powerful. So, in
No,
terms
I'll
of
read it, yeah.
in terms of changing culture is what I was trying to get to. So, yeah.
Well,
Okay.
well, now you know that I was an absolute sucker for what it said.
I have a question for the panel, and it's I have to credit my friend Deb Perron, who's one of the early founders of the Rape Crisis Center in Toronto. What would happen to our culture if every single young girl took self-defense? Seriously. If every single young woman took self-defense by the time she was 8 years old, so that men who automatically felt entitled to our bodies realized that if they tried anything, they were going to get the shit kicked out of them. Well, I agree it's a stopgap measure. I agree it's a stopgap measure. But
And
I'm not saying we have to be responsible. I'm not saying that it's on us. I'm just questioning whether that would make a difference. No, all right, sorry. Sorry, Deb.
But I think that's exactly what I was trying to get at. Let's teach our boys and girls at a young age what's right, what's wrong. Do boys have that sense to create? Should they be so entitled that they could do what they want to as they get older? I think that's the message that we need to start breeding at a very young age.
I was going to say, and some of you probably have looked at this, one of the things I find really interesting is if you look at global patterns of sexual violence, and while it is true that it's pervasive and it's not confined to any particular class, there are cultures where sexual violence is simply not as prevalent as it is either in the West or elsewhere. If you look at Japan, if you look at China, even though both have had histories of violence. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is trying to understand what is it that is embedded in those cultures and what is it in the process of socialization of boys and girls, because it really, again, education, of course, important, but the images that we're bombarded with in the media undo all of the good teaching that you get at home. There are studies on Amish communities, for example, and how they are able to counter many of the tendencies of Western violence. And I think that that's an area that's really very interesting because, as someone was pointing out, there are people who live in very much the same circumstances and behave in different ways. How do you build that resilience? And you need to look at individuals, you need to look at institutions, and you need to look at culture.
And I think there are some very important structural issues of this nature of Western society that I think we do need to own, and is about some of the stuff that has resulted in Trump. The more unequal your society, the greater the structural, economic, and social violence it's done to people, the more you alienate people and the more you engender the sort of environment where boys, young men like this develop. We know that more equal societies empower women more, has more economic equality, has greater education and lower levels of violence. It doesn't solve it. There are bad things that emerge within very equal societies as well, but the structural stuff is very important. And it is that has given rise to some of the populism and the extreme nativism and so on that has emerged, both in the UK and in the US, and as societies become more unequal. And of course, India is a profoundly unequal society, and we're captured that. But one of the powers of what you've done, Mehta, Deepa, is the universality of that. So although we're seeing it in India, those dynamics exist within poor communities in New Zealand, where I'm from, and Toronto. And the more unequal, the greater the gap between rich and poor, the more misery we impose on chunks of, of societies, then the more we will generate alienation and difficulty. So it is about to whom and how we structure compassion in our societies. And those things matter a huge amount in terms of reducing societal violence. The positive message is that if you look over the course of history, we've never lived in a safer time. The worry is, of course, seeing the horror of this, is that we are still capable of immense interpersonal viciousness nonetheless, and we're in control of many of the drivers that will determine how common or how rare such phenomena are.
Yes. I'm sorry, one last question.
Hi.
Excuse me? Go to the back. They were asking me to go to the back. I can't. Oh, here, over. Excellent. Thank you. One question here, and we will get to you, I promise. We see you.
I'll be quick. Thank you. I just wanted to respond to your self-defense class question to begin with. I'm a self-defense instructor, and I do teach children, and I have taught girls in developing countries self-defense and that kind of thing. And so I think one of the important aspects of that is the mental aspect, because the original girls who said no to the boys and like got really angry, and there was a finger flying around. It was the intrinsic confidence that came from, which is the thing that essentially saved her. And so I think from self-defense classes, it's not necessarily just the physical thing, because you're right, against 6 men, self-defense isn't gonna help you as much as it should. However, it's the confidence and the mental aspect of self-defense that I think can be very, very valuable to anyone that may take a self-defense class, regardless of gender and regardless of age.
And I think we both agree, and thank you, because I was feeling terrible about my comment. But I think what we're getting at is we all really want it not to, I don't feel like we all have to be waiting and hoping that we're ready and be fully prepared with self-defense. Of course we would rather we didn't have to do it. I'm just saying that you're right about how we respond as women in that moment, and young women as well. And I do think it does make a difference. Yeah. Well, let's not get the castration response quite yet. Okay. Yes.
My question is very simple. Why hasn't anyone in the panel named the system of oppression called patriarchy in this discussion? Not one single person has mentioned that. It's the elephant in the room. I'm appalled.
Don't be appalled. I've talked about it ad nauseum, so maybe I forgot to say it today. But I talk about it all the time. I talk about patriarchy, misogyny, but patriarchy first, always.
And thank you for bringing up the word, but really, these are, I mean, many of us have been doing this work for a long time. And I do, however, appreciate, because I find that, you know, it's a good word and it describes it. But to be fair to our panelists, everyone has used the term power. Everyone has talked about entitlement. And those are the umbrella under which, and patriarchy is the umbrella for all of that. Excuse me, hello?
The conversation has been around what women need to do. And what we're talking about to address the actual issue is what men need to do. I spoke about it. We have reared men to be in this little small box, and many of them are fighting to get out of this. And we as a society keep containing men, we keep containing women, we keep containing people, and not allowing them to be bigger than that. And that's the conversation that I feel like we need to start having. Like what we can do different beyond the family, but looking at our system and the power structures that exist that keep patriarchy in there. And that's the problem.
Listen, I'm going to go at it again. I mentioned that at the first time I said it, I said, we really need the guys. This is about us, about humanity, not they and us. We are knit together, and we have to solve it together, and we're all apart, we live on the same planet. So I did say it.
And I think that I do, I mean, what I'm appreciating from the comments is the passion and how important it is for us to be addressing this. I mean, I was trying to talk about, the person over there mentioned how this issue is so profoundly gendered. We've talked about sex roles, which I think are really, really important in the way that we put everybody in the boxes. Are those the boxes to which you're referring? The person who made that comment? Yes. And it's so basic that it does start when, you know, I went to the nurse's station to ask for a blanket for my 11-hour-old daughter, and the nurse said, "Is it a boy or a girl?" And I said, "It's a cold baby. Give me a blanket." But she wanted to know if it was a boy or a girl so she could start pinkifying, you know, our daughter at 11. I'm seriously, like, I think, you know, but she wasn't even like 2 hours old. So I do think that all of these things are connected. And I think when people at the panel are talking about how there's a certain level, even though there is this patriarchal system that is at work, that I think there is a level, and we've talked about it, that it does begin with how we relate to each other from the beginning. Although somebody made the comment about how you can be, I mean, you learn this, you know, you can be the best parent ever, and they're still going out into a world of pornography and in a world of, you know, media, and in a world that just keeps replicating all of these power dynamics. But it's, I guess what we're saying, and we almost have to bring it to an end at this time, is it's like everything. And the thing about fighting patriarchy is that it happens at every single level. And our panel this evening has been trying to deal with, I knew that when we started this, and everybody looked at me and said, "Don't ask me to answer in one way." They all said, "Please, I beg you, Susan, don't." And now, you know, we seem to be paying the price. But I think what we want to get out of the conversation is that change has to happen at all levels. There are guys out in down east who are painting their fingernails in a movement to end child abuse. There are men wearing white ribbons and putting on high-heeled shoes to, you know, be walking in women's shoes. There's a whole women's movement that has built the institutions that have sheltered wife assault survivors and have assisted sexual assault survivors. We have been, you know, they've been working really hard, but all the work has to take place at all levels, whether it's art from Deepa Mehta or any of the work that is being done by these people here, and all the work of all of you in our audience. And on that note, I'm afraid I have to say good night.